deal with the develop module in Lightroom. You'll find the develop module right next to the library module right here. And the develop module works in a very intuitive way. You simply turn to your photograph, and when you want to edit it, you go from top to bottom with the develop windows you've got on the right here. On the left, by the way, you can find some presets you can apply to your pictures. You can call them filters if you like. I'm going to skip that particular step. You can experiment with it, of course. I'm simply going to turn to the develop module. At the top, you can see the histogram. I hope you remember this gives you a clear idea whether your picture is properly exposed or not. A histogram that shows a peak to the left, for instance, is underexposed, vice versa. A histogram that shows a peak to the right is overexposed. So some useful information to be found at the top. You can also find the settings of your camera, as a matter of fact. Okay, I'm going to turn to the first tool here. This is to crop your picture. If I click on it, you can see that this window opens, the crop and straighten tool. Important to draw your attention to is the fact that this lock is locked in this case, which means that if I'm going to change the size of my picture by, for instance, dragging this slider down, the ratio is kept. So this is the ratio 3:2. That's the original ratio of a photograph. I can change the crop like this, or I can go to the corner and pull it down like this, etc. But the neat thing is, of course, that the ratio is kept. If I unlock it, then I can come up with whatever ratio I want. But this is a thing I would disadvise you, because a ratio like this, for instance, doesn't work really well. So if you want to use another ratio, you can simply click on these arrows. If you click on them, then you can, for instance, decide to go for the square ratio, 1:1, or for some kind of cinematic ratio, the 16:9. You can get a crop like this. Okay, but we're going to turn to the original ratio and keep it like that. Another thing you can do with this particular tool is straighten your photograph. I can do so by standing just outside of the picture here, and now, as you can see, my pointer changes into this tool that will allow me to straighten the photograph. So I'm going to make it straight. When I have a look at the background, this particular line here, even though it's not an architectural shot, it's a portrait photograph, but still it makes my picture a bit more relaxed when the line in the background is straight. What else I'm going to do? I'm going to pull this down so I can put her eyes at a third, and I'll make sure that there is some symmetry. What do I mean with that? The distance between this line and her eye is identical to the distance between this line and her other eye. Okay, I confirm by doing this. And by the way, all the things we're doing here to develop our photograph, they are non-destructive. What does that mean? I never need to hit save. Lightroom keeps track of whatever I'm doing, and it won't be necessary to save at any time. Moreover, as I said, it's non-destructive. So what does that mean? When I change my photograph, I can always go back. This is very different from Photoshop. When you hit save, once in a while you need to hit save while still working on a particular photograph, and you close Photoshop, then all those steps before are gone. Now, if I close Lightroom and I open it again, you will notice that you still can return to the previous version of your picture. So all the changes you make are non-destructive. You can always go back. So let me carry on with the develop tool. The first thing I can change is the white balance. I intentionally made a mistake when it comes to this picture. It's far too blue. So we still need to adjust the white balance. And that's the first thing we can change here. As you can see here, WB for white balance. This is as shot. I can change that to, for instance, cloudy, which is going to make my picture a lot more yellow. I can come up with all the presets you have available in your camera, as a matter of fact. But I also have these two sliders. I've got a blue to yellow slider for the temperature. And I've got this green to magenta slider, which adjusts the color cast you would get with fluorescent lights. So you can adjust things manually, or you can use this pipette tool. And if you put that on a particular spot in your picture, which is supposed to not have any color at all, for instance, the tag she's wearing on her shirt, this is white, it shouldn't have any color cast to it. Well, if I click here, it will set the white balance automatically. Let me do this again. So I go to the pipette tool, I click on this part here, and as you can see, the white balance is perfect like this. You shouldn't put that pipette tool on any other color. For instance, if I put it on on her green shirt, then I end up with a completely wrong white balance. So you can only put the pipette tool on something that is white or gray, something that shouldn't have any color to it. Okay, let me quickly adjust the crop and the straightness of my photograph here. What's next? You can adjust the exposure, how bright or how dark your picture is. Now this particular picture is properly exposed, so no need to adjust the exposure. You can add contrast with this slider. Don't overdo it, particularly with color photographs, because if you go for too much contrast, as you can see, you end up with colors that don't look natural anymore. So you can add some contrast with black and white pictures, then you can add more contrast. It would still look all right. The highlights, have a look at the part in the background, because there you will find the highlights, the brightest parts in this picture. Now I'm only adjusting these with this particular slider. With the shadows, I only adjust the shadow parts or the darker bits. Double clicking, by the way, on these items. For instance, if I'm gonna make the whites very white, if I double click on whites, it's immediately put to the center again, which can be quite useful sometimes. So the whites, by the way, have a look at the histogram at the top right corner. What part exactly is adjusted by changing this slider. I'm sorry. Same goes for the blacks. That's the part in the histogram totally to the left. I can, as a matter of fact, adjust the blacks and the shadows, etc. in the histogram itself as well, by simply dragging in the histogram. I can adjust the exposure, I can adjust the whites, etc. As you can see, I can do the same thing in the histogram. Okay, these were some basic items which you can use for your portrait photographs. Let me show you some more basic adjustments you can turn to on the basis of this picture. I would like to turn to the presence section in this window. Particularly the clarity can be quite useful. I'll zoom in a bit so you can have a look at this picture a bit more in detail. If I'm going to adjust the clarity, have a look at what it does. It adds some kind of local contrast, which for this particular picture is suited. Don't do a thing like that with, for instance, a portrait photograph. Let me show you what you end up with if you're going to change the clarity. This looks quite awful. Yeah. So particularly for the skin, it's a really bad thing to do. You could use it to adjust the hair, I have to admit, but then you need to select the hair, and that's what I will turn to in one of the following tutorials. So let me return to this photograph. I'll zoom out. So this is what the clarity slider does. It adds some local contrast. Texture does a similar thing in a slightly different way. You should experiment with that. And finally, this slider here, the dehaze, have a look at what this does. Yeah, it brings back quite a lot of detail in your photograph. It's particularly meant for pictures which show some fog, but you can use it for other pictures to bring back some details. Saturation speaks for itself. This is very saturated, and if I take away all the saturation, I end up with a black and white photograph, which, by the way, is not an ideal way to turn your pictures into black and white. Okay, these were the basic adjustments in the develop module. I'll turn to another item. I can turn this picture into black and white by hitting this item here, black and white. And then if I click on these boxes, I can show, or I can have some different profiles. You can get them for color versions as well, as a matter of fact. Perhaps I should quickly turn to them too. Only the color profiles. So they're a bit similar to presets, but they work in a different way. I prefer using these profiles instead of presets because it gives you more flexibility. What do I mean with that? Well, I'll give you an example. I'll go for an extreme one perhaps. For instance, this one. I can decide upon the amount of this vintage profile. Yeah, if I turn it to the left, it's completely disabled. If I turn it to the right, it's the amount is 200, sort of speaking. So this is a thing you can't do with the presets. So let me turn to the black and white presets, or profiles as I should call them. Right here. So I can start off with this particular black and white version. I'm going to bring the exposure down in this case. Yeah. And with a black and white picture like this, I would like to draw the attention to the face and the eyes, not to her shirt. Now in this case, her shirt is quite bright. If I want to make this shirt darker, there are several ways of doing things in Lightroom. In this case, one way of doing so would be turning to the black and white section in this develop tool. And here you have different sliders for different colors. Lightroom, of course, still knows what the colors were, and this will allow me to come up with different versions of that black and white conversion on the basis of these color sliders. So there are, for instance, some orange tones in this picture. If I change that, it particularly has an effect on the orange parts in the photograph. As you can see, her green shirt is not affected by changing this orange slider. If I want to make her shirt darker, I would need to know what color it has, this shirt. In case you don't remember, you can simply click on this tool here, the circle, and then if I go to the photograph and I click and hold and I drag down, then as you can see, it adjusts those colors of that photograph. So in that way, I can make that particular color a lot darker. Of course, it has an effect on the entire picture. So there are some similar colors in the background, as you can see, and they are also affected. Later on, I will show you how you can selectively change these colors by applying masks. But let me demonstrate things one more time. I put this cross on the spray can. I click and drag it down, and as you can see, it makes those colors darker. But as you can see at the same time, it has an effect on her skin tones because there are similar colors in her skin. Okay, but this is a useful thing to do when you turn your picture into black and white and you want to make certain parts darker or brighter. Okay, have a go at this first picture. Simply come up with the version I have included in the modules on Canvas.